Hello and welcome to Deadly Effigy. I'm Luke Logau, and today I'm going to share with you 3 things that I wish I'd known about oil painting. I will be painting this lovely portrait here. So it's freezing cold here in the Midwest right now, and I was out shoveling my driveway when I thought about those photos of those monkeys in the hot springs. I mean, look at this dude. That is one happy monkey. Anyway, it inspired me to paint something kinda like that. I didn't really look at reference. That was part of the inspiration. Alright, so let's get into it. So I'm just making some shapes with my largest brush here. Not really committing to anything too quickly. Always ready, for inspiration to strike. And a lot of the times I just take inspiration from accidents. And brush strokes inform a lot of my decisions in painting. So I try to use every brush stroke if I can. The direction, the application of paint. And as you see, I'm just going through, just picking. This is a reductive technique. It's also known as pickouts. I believe for that very reason, because you're kind of picking out the color rather than adding any color. And I'm just refining it more and more. And it was at this point that the painting made me crack a smile. So I knew I was on the right track. Which might be a good question for you all out there, actually. Does comedy belong in art? In fine art? How about horror? 'Cause if not, then I'm in trouble. I try to add a little comedy and a little horror into everything I do, because that's my favorite stuff, I do what I know. So now I'm just taking the same color that I used essentially in my background wash, and I'm just going in and darkening a few select areas. Which brings me to my first tip. The first thing that I wish I'd known when I started painting is that the underpainting is maybe the most important part of your painting. It informs everything else. It is the structure on which you build the rest of your painting. And if you don't draw, like me, I do draw, but I don't draw out my painting ideas. I would recommend trying an underpainting in blue, because shadows are blue, and that bit of blue will come through any other color that you put on top of it. So that is number 1. Alright, with the underpainting done, I'm ready for some color, which leads me to the second thing that I wish I'd known when I started, and that will require an experiment. Check this color out. Pyrolle orange. Let's put down a little dab on my palette. And now let's check out this color. Turquoise blue. We'll put a little dab of that down on the palette. Now, just take a moment and try to predict what you think these two colors will do when they're mixed together. Got our turquoise. Now, my prediction would be that it'll be kind of like a purpley, brownish, maybe. And no, sir. Somehow it's turning green. Let's add a little more. And now we're into like brown territory. Okay, what happens if we add a tiny bit more? And somehow it's even darker. The reason behind that is because turquoise is a opaque color, and our Pyrolle orange is a transparent color. I did not know anything about this. This can really mess you up, and trust me, it is the reason why I struggled so hard when I first started oil painting. Here's a chart. These little squares tell you exactly what they are: transparent, semi-transparent, semi-opaque, and opaque. So that's something you should really pay attention to when you're buying colors. A lot of it I think you can probably get away with just adding a little bit of white or a lighter color if you buy one that's transparent and weren't aware of it. But something to think about for sure. So I am moving on now to the coloring process. I do tend to go a little warmer in my color mixes because my underpainting is blue, and I kind of want to use that to my advantage. Those darkest areas here, you can see, I actually do just mix directly into the underpainting. It is kind of like glazing, but the underpainting is more like becoming a part of it. It's not cured, so I wouldn't really call it glazing. And the colors I'm using are opaque for the most part, so moving on to some luscious lips. Again, mixing these very bright on my palette so that they come off really bright on my blue underpainting. Another thing I love about oil paint is you can just go and go and go. I pretty much painted those lips in one sitting and called it good. I think one thing also to note about transparent colors is I remember when I was struggling with oil paint years ago when I first tried them, that I was just making up for their transparency by adding a bunch of white, which will lead to washing out your paintings. And well, it wasn't what I was going for. It could be what you're going for, though. Here's another little something here. This strange wrinkle crack around the chin here. I always try to keep in mind when I'm painting from my own imagination to hide some of it, because my instinct is to show as much of that as possible because I have a good time painting it. So to make it look more natural, I go ahead and hide some of it because, I mean, if it were up to me, I'd have it completely avoiding the finger there on the hand, and so you can see all of it. And that just doesn't look real. I call it contour-itis. So I'm always trying to remember that. It is tough, though, when you get into the zone. You know, I essentially am like meditating when I'm painting, and I can, completely lose track of what looks natural and what doesn't. Mixing in some new colors here. I'm using a bit more alizarin in the cheeks and up into the upper left of the head here. I wanted kind of a old school comic booky kind of feel, I guess. Warm on one side, cold on the other. It is freezing cold here in the Midwest right now. I think that also inspired this painting a tad. I've also been watching a lot of 60s and 70s Italian horror films, which I don't know if they inspired the painting too much, but I think they may have inspired the way that I edited this. So moving on now to the third bit of advice / something I wish I'd known when I started painting, and that's just don't listen to me or to anybody else, really. You can use people's advice as like a springboard to get started, but if it's not working for you, do what works. Is essentially what I'm saying. Figure out what works for you, and that's the hardest part about it, is finding out exactly what works for you. It takes a lot of trial and error, takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of dedication, just experimenting. Maybe I should rephrase that. Listening is great. That's how you learn. But when people tell you you need this, that, and the other thing to be an artist, it's not true. That's what I'm getting at. For example, if I were to have listened to pretty much every art teacher I'd ever had, or a lot of artists here on YouTube, not all of them, but a lot of them, they're a little art snobby, like they think you should have good brushes, and I will use a brush until there's like half the hairs on it that it started with, and they're not good brushes. They're the cheapest ones, but if you wash them out every time you're done painting and try to keep them nice, they'll last. When I was younger and started painting, I bought good brushes. I have bought good brushes before, and I didn't notice them lasting any longer than the cheap ones. Not the super cheap ones, but like bargain brushes. But then again, I probably didn't treat those nice brushes as nicely as I should have, because I was young and stupid. Yes, so do what works for you. If it works, no one can argue with it. I always love painting eyes. The whole painting comes to life when you paint the eyes. I tend to save it towards the end too, kind of like when I was a kid, I would eat the crust on a peanut butter and jelly sandwich first, so that you had like the real good part to eat at the end. Does that make any sense? Painting eyes is fun. Still having a lot of fun with these colors. I have, though, looked through my Instagram lately and been like, oh, look, a green and a red guy, and a green and a blue guy, and a green and a, yeah. So maybe I should try a new color. And now you may be wondering, what's this lovely lady doing out in the freezing cold with frost-bitten hands and a fabulous white fur coat? Well, that's up to you. That's for you to decide. So I painted the frostbite hand, and now I'm moving on to painting fur, which I believe this is the first time I've painted fur in oil. And I haven't really painted a lot of fur in general. So it's a bit of an experiment. Took some inspiration from a fellow YouTuber artist, Albert Fisk. He paints awesome furry little monsters and things, and he does videos here on YouTube that are really cool. He does all acrylic though, and I've while watching his paintings, he starts off real soft and then comes in and does like little hairs later, which is what I kind of attempted to do on this. I'm just doing some wispy hair in the misty, foggy atmosphere. It's pretty fun. Also, don't paint a whole lot of hair. A lot of my characters tend to be a little bald. This one's no different. She's missing some hair. One thing I wish I had captured a little bit more was the way that animal fur gets really super dark when it's saturated and wet. I was kind of going for that stringiness at the bottom there, but I didn't quite get that. And that just about brings us to the end of this painting. Take a moment now to mention my Patreon. If you're interested in helping me make this channel as cool as I possibly can, check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. Trying to do some kind of cool stuff on there. A little bit more behind the scenes look at some things and some videos in the works for that. Remember to leave me a comment and let me know if you think horror or comedy belong in fine art. And it's time to sign this one. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies. Here's the finished piece. Have an awesome week, everybody.